Today, we will be covering marketing strategy and consumer behavior. This nice figure provides an overview of how we go from the things that we do from a strategy perspective all the way to how we can affect consumer decision processes and the outcomes of these decision processes. From the most basic level, right, we've talked about broadly marketing analysis to understand our consumers, competitors, our company, and we've talked about that through the SWOT analysis, through Porter's five forces that have been brought up in our case reports, and we've also talked about the importance of market segmentation and the aspects of the marketing mix: product, place, price, promotion, and the service quality that we provide. And then today we're going to be focused on this consumer decision processes aspect here. So we'll be talking about that, and we'll also talk about a few of those outcomes. So let's go ahead and jump in. So there are some influences on consumer decision making. All of these are between the social, marketing, and situational influences that impact psychological influences, which then in turn impact consumer decision making. And this comes from our textbook that we use in this course. This is a nice figure that shows us different factors that also could influence consumer behavior. And these are a lot more detailed. This provides us a nice overview of all the potential factors that could influence a consumer's decision process. So we have marketing that we could talk about right here. We have marketing, and we also have our psychological here. We have some of the situational influences based on the environment, our social aspects, some personal things that could impact our buyer decision processes, different culture aspects, and then a buyer's response to all of these things. So what time it is, the service, the category, how much the purchase is going to be. So lots of different factors can be influencing customers' behavior during the purchase process. One of the things that we talk about in an article that I published with Dr. McDonald and Dr. Lavery is how advertising can influence consumers, and how different things that are happening in the legal and political environment can also impact the values and norms of society. And with that, we have a lot of sociocultural changes, that all of these things are in a cycle. So advertising does influence society, but all of these other things also influence advertising. So that's just a really big picture kind of idea from a macro perspective, that advertising influences society and society influences advertising and what we see in those commercials. So with marketing strategy and consumer decision making, there's the product influences like we've talked about. This goes anywhere from like the brand name, the quality of the product, how new the product is, how complex that product is for us to understand, the appearance, packaging, labeling, all of those different things. So what type of strategy would most align with how products influence consumers? And I'll let you think about that. We also have price influences. So this could be value conscious consumers, that they buy products more on the basis of price rather than other attributes. And a marketing strategy that would be beneficial when considering price influence. There's also something that you should be mindful of and you should look at whenever we talk about these. These come from chapter 1, so you could go back and look at that, but you should be aware of these things so that you understand, okay, There is a strategy on how products influence consumers. There is a strategy about how price influences consumers and what type of strategy that is. So for product, we could talk about a differentiation strategy. For price, we could talk about the cost leadership strategy. With promotion influences, we have those based off of advertising, any type of sales promotions, how salespeople can affect consumers, the different publicity that a product or service could get. This would go in the range of IMC, integrated marketing communication strategies, which we'll talk about in more detail in later chapters. And with the promotion influences, those can affect those psychological aspects of decision making. And we'll talk a lot about that in the remainder of this presentation. And finally, we have place influences. So if it's convenient to buy, if it's sold at exclusive outlets, or if it's being offered by non-store methods. And there is a marketing strategy that would be beneficial when considering place influences. And I'll let you think about that for a little bit. We also have our senses that can be influenced by our place. So senses would be in the form of smell, in the form of sight, right? The way that a retail location smells, or even like where we're getting a service performed at, the way that it smells, the way that it looks, also can influence our buying decision process. And there's lots of studies that have looked at this in marketing about how place influences can affect the senses, and how by affecting the senses, how that leads to greater purchase intention and more involvement from the customer. So I've given you kind of a few minutes to think about how marketing strategy would be beneficial when considering place influences. We could consider distribution strategy as one thing that we've kind of talked about as far as place influences go. And next we'll talk about situational influences. So situational influences are just based off of what's happening at that current time. So this could be the physical features, like the weather that's occurring, anything geographical, what's happening like on the street. Say you go in, you're like shopping on the Main Street, and there's like a food truck festival going on. That's going to impact what you purchase at some of those individual locations on Main Street. So there's lots of different things that could be happening, whether the weather affecting you. So if it's really hot outside, you're probably going to want to go in somewhere cool, and you may spend a lot of time shopping because you want to get out of the hot sun. Same thing goes for cold. You want to get somewhere warm. It may also be that the weather, if it's really hot outside, you go and purchase ice cream, or you go and purchase a bottled water. If it's cold, you may be more likely to purchase a hot coffee or hot cocoa. We also have social features, so those are who you're with at that time, and that can vary just based off of, okay, whether you're with a family member, a friend, a partner, can vary based off of who you're with and who's there at the retail location or the service provider. Time is also another important dimension. So whether you go shop for groceries at 8 a.m. in the morning, or if you're going at 7 o'clock at night, what you purchase may be influenced by that time of day, especially because you may be more hungry. Maybe it's you haven't eaten dinner yet, and you go at 7 p.m. and you just feel like you buy a lot more products because you're really hungry. Whereas at 8 a.m., maybe you already had breakfast and you just get the things that are on your list. So time can vary and influence consumer behavior. We also have task features. So what you're shopping for and the information required to shop for that particular item, whatever it may be, also influences your behavior. And then finally, the current conditions. This goes to the moods, emotions that you as a consumer are feeling during the time that you're making your purchase. So maybe you had a bad day at work and you had to go shopping for your groceries. That can affect what you purchase and your overall mood towards the retailer in that case. Maybe you're having a really great day and that just encourages you to buy something maybe you really wanted, but you haven't really wanted to splurge on. So lots of different factors could influence your current situation. We also have these decision-making process, and that's really important. All of these factors that we talked about, the physical features, social features, time, task, our knowledge, our psychological involvement, all of these things underlie our consumer decision making process. So they're all affecting the consumer's decision making. But during the decision making process, we go through several steps, which nowadays in conventional literature and digital marketing space, they talk about how customers go through a journey. It's not so linear in the sense that, okay, they first recognize a need, they do a search, they evaluate different alternatives. It doesn't go through that exact linear process, that it's more of a journey perspective. But we can view the consumer decision making process in the most basic sense as going through some type of process similar to this. So there are different types of decisions that we make, and this could be extensive decision making, limited decision making, and finally routine decision making. Extensive decision making would be in the sense that, okay, you're going to be spending probably a high dollar amount. So like if you're buying a car, you probably go through extensive decision making time for you to be able to process all the information that's out there. Now, with limited decision making, this could occur where, okay, it's somewhat of a big decision, but it's not so much where we have to take too much time. You may have a few decision alternatives that you're trying to decide between, and it takes you a limited amount of time to make those decisions. Whereas routine, this would be something that you purchase on a regular basis. So like your toothpaste, laundry detergent, the groceries that you typically purchase, oftentimes those things are very routine, right? We're pretty much familiar. We like the same laundry detergent that we've used countless times. We like the same toothpaste, same toothbrush. All of those things are pretty routine decision making. You don't have to think about it too much. This also relates to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So our needs recognition is based off of what type of need that we're looking at. So we may need physiological, safety, belongingness, esteem, and there's a great video that delves into Maslow's hierarchy of needs in a much deeper perspective. So I encourage you to watch that video in this module. We also have alternative search, and alternative search is pretty important. Obviously, we may have our own personal experiences that could help us think of alternatives that might apply to our particular need. We may also reach out to any groups that we belong to. So if you're involved in a fraternity, sorority, you may reach out to someone you know in your fraternity or sorority to ask them their opinion. You may ask your family members, or if you belong to, let's say, like a church or any other type of organization on campus, you may reach out just to somebody you know that belongs to that group because they may have a good idea. Maybe they purchased the product in the past, or they may have had a similar need. We also could look at marketing sources. So advertising is really an important indicator for us to be able to search for potential alternatives. We could also look at different packaging. So this is really great if you visualize whenever you're at the grocery store and you're trying to decide between like two different brands. You could look at the packaging, the displays that are on there, and that could help you determine different alternatives that might fit your needs. We could also look at public sources, so this might be from newspaper articles, or what we're probably most familiar with is like ratings of a product online. So this could be through Consumer Reports, or we could look at even ratings like on Amazon, public ratings, or on Yelp whenever we're trying to find like a restaurant. And then finally, experiential sources, and this could come from like if you've ever been to Costco or Sam's or even Market Street where they're allowing sampling, you could have an experiential source of alternative search. So you may be looking, let's say, for a bottle of wine, and it just so happens that that day that you go into Market Street, they're having a sample of a particular wine. Well, okay, you had this idea that you wanted one in mind, but after you try it, you're like, oh, this is really good. And so maybe you consider that as an alternative option for you to fill your need. So lots of different ways that we could handle alternative search. And from a marketing standpoint, even from marketing and experiential, we as firms, from a strategy perspective, we can affect those things and get customers to change their potential alternatives just by the things that we do from our standpoint. Finally, today we will be talking about how consumers process information, and it's important for marketers to understand this so that they can present information in the most inviting way for consumers to retain. So consumers process information in 4 steps. One being that they're first exposed to that information. So we could think of this like an advertisement. The consumer sees that advertisement, they start to become attentive to that advertisement, so it has to attract them in some way, right? Oftentimes, like let's think of if we're watching TV or if we're watching on Hulu where we have to see those ads. Sometimes we may just like walk out of the room, right? Or even just fast forward if we can through those advertisements. So sometimes an ad catches our attention, and that ad, we have to be able to understand that information that's presented to us, and then we can thus retain that information and keep it in our working memory. So marketers, if they can reverse engineer this process and make it to where it's the easiest to process their advertisement, their promotion, whatever it may be, then they can help customers retain that information much more easily. So that gives us a very quick overview of how marketing strategy and consumer behavior can be tied together and how marketing strategy affects consumer behavior. If you have questions on this topic, feel free to email me at kt.manus@ttu.edu. Thanks. Bye-bye.